My name is Lauren. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas, though I spent most of my 20s in Seattle, trying to forget where I came from. I'm telling you this story because money has a way of revealing who people really are. And family. Family has a way of using your trust like a blank check. My uncle stole $672,000 from me over the course of 8 years. He did it slowly, methodically, with my full permission. And I didn't know until a tenant I'd never met knocked on a door I didn't know I owned. But let me start where it actually began. My grandfather died when I was 21. I was in my senior year at UC Berkeley, double majoring in economics and art history because I couldn't decide who I wanted to be yet. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was a commercial real estate investor. Not wealthy in the flashy way. Wealthy in the quiet, compounding way. He owned a handful of small apartment buildings in Oakland, Portland, and Tacoma. Nothing luxury. Just solid working-class housing. Reliable. He was the same. Steady. Kind. The only adult in my family who ever asked me what I actually wanted. My mother had died when I was 16. Breast cancer. My father remarried a year later and moved to Florida with a woman I'd met twice. After that, my grandfather became everything. When he passed, I inherited 3 of his properties. A 12-unit building in Oakland. An 8-unit in Portland. A 6-unit in Tacoma. The will was clear. The properties were mine outright. No liens. Paid off. Generating steady rental income. My grandfather had left me something most people my age only dream about: financial security. Independence. A foundation. I was 21 years old, still in school, still figuring out how to do my taxes. I had no idea how to manage apartment buildings. And that's where my uncle came in. Richard was my mom's older brother. He'd worked in property management for years. He knew the tenants. He knew the buildings. He'd helped my grandfather run everything for the last decade. At the funeral, he pulled me aside. Told me he was proud of me. Told me my grandfather would want me to finish school, build my career, live my life. He said he'd take care of the properties. Collect rent. Handle repairs. Pay the taxes and insurance. Transfer my net income every month. All I had to do was sign a property management agreement and let him run things the way he always had. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was family. He'd been at every Christmas. Every birthday. He sent me cards when my mom died. I signed the paperwork without reading it. I was 21 and drowning in grief. He seemed like the only lifeline I had. For 8 years, Richard sent me a check every month. Sometimes $3,000. Sometimes $4,500. It varied depending on vacancies, he said. Depending on repairs. I didn't question it. I was building a life. I graduated. Got a job at a financial consulting firm in Seattle. Moved into a decent apartment. Started dating someone. Saved money. Lived carefully. I always thought the rental income was nice supplemental cash, not life-changing, but helpful. I didn't realize I was supposed to be getting 3 times what he was sending me. I didn't know because I never saw the lease agreements. Never saw the actual rent rolls. Never visited the properties. Richard told me everything was handled. And I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. Because it was easier than dealing with the grief of losing the last person who'd really loved me. Because I didn't want to think about my grandfather's buildings as mine. They were his. I was just holding them. Or so I thought. The truth started unraveling on a Tuesday in March. I was at my desk in Seattle when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was older. Female. Calm but confused. She said, "Hi, is this Lauren Ashford?" I said yes. She said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm a tenant in your building on Hawthorne in Portland. I've been trying to reach your uncle for 3 weeks about a plumbing issue and he won't return my calls." I froze. I didn't own a building on Hawthorne. I owned one in northeast Portland on a street I couldn't even remember the name of. I told her she must have the wrong person. She said, "No, I got your contact info from the county assessor's office. You're listed as the owner. Lauren Ashford. The building at 1428, Hawthorne Boulevard." I pulled up the county website while she was still on the line. Typed in the address. And there it was. Owner of record, Lauren Ashford. Date of transfer, 8 years ago. The same month my grandfather died. I stared at the screen. My hands went cold. I said, "Can I call you back?" She said sure and gave me her number. I sat there for a long time. Then I started searching. I pulled up the records for all 3 properties. Oakland, Portland, Tacoma. I looked at the rent rolls I'd never asked to see. I looked at the leases Richard had never sent me. And then I did the math. The 12-unit building in Oakland was pulling in $7,800 a month. Richard had been sending me $2,200. The 8-unit in Portland was bringing in $6,100 a month. He'd been sending me $1,800. The 6-unit in Tacoma was collecting $4,200. He'd been sending me $1,200. For 8 years, I'd been getting roughly 30% of the income my properties generated. The rest had been going into his account. I sat in that office until the cleaning crew came through. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there doing the math over and over again, hoping I'd missed something. I hadn't. Richard had stolen $672,000 from me, give or take. And I'd signed a document that probably gave him every legal shield he needed. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I pulled every piece of paperwork I had. The property management agreement I'd signed at 21. The monthly statements he'd sent me, vague, single-page summaries with no receipts attached. The tax returns I'd filed, trusting the numbers he gave me. I'd been filing taxes on income one wasn't even receiving. The IRS thought I'd made money I'd never seen. And Richard had been pocketing the difference. By dawn, I'd made a list. I needed 3 things. A real estate attorney, a forensic accountant, and a way to confront my uncle without him disappearing. I started with the attorney. Her name was Victoria E.N.G. She had a small firm in Portland that specialized in elder fraud and fiduciary abuse. When I told her what happened, she didn't sugarcharge it. She said, "This is going to be ugly. His family. And he's had 8 years to cover his tracks. But if the agreement you signed doesn't explicitly authorize him to keep that much income, we have a case." I sent her everything. She called me 2 days later. Victoria said the property management agreement I'd signed allowed Richard to take a fee. Industry standard was 8 to 10% of gross rental income. He'd been taking 70%. And there was no clause in the contract that authorized him to withhold funds for reserves or long-term repairs without my written approval. He'd been committing theft, breaching fiduciary duty, possibly filing fraudulent tax documents. She said we could sue. We could file a criminal complaint. Or we could try to settle quietly. I didn't want quiet. I wanted every dollar back. And I wanted him to know I knew. Before we get into this, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Victoria advised me not to contact Richard directly. She said we should file first, then serve him. But I needed to see his face. I needed to hear him try to explain it. So I did something she told me not to do. I flew to Portland. I didn't tell Richard the first was coming. I rented a car and drove to the Hawthorne building, the one I didn't even know I owned until a tenant called me. I walked through it. Met the tenant who'd reached out. Her name was Diane. She'd lived there for 6 years. She told me the plumbing had been broken for a month. That Richard rarely responded. That tenants had learned to fix things themselves or just deal with it. I asked her what she paid in rent. She said $1,100 a month for a 2-bedroom. I pulled up comparable units in the area. Market rate was $1,600. Richard had been undercharging tenants, pocketing the majority of even that reduced income, and providing almost no maintenance. He'd turned my inheritance into a slush fund. I drove to his house that afternoon. He lived in Lake Oswego. Nice neighborhood. Two-story colonial. New Audi in the driveway. All of it built on money he stole from me. I knocked. He answered. He looked surprised. Then pleased. He smiled and said, "Lauren, what are you doing here? Why didn't you call?" I said, "I need to talk to you about the properties." His smile thinned. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Like he didn't want me in his house. I said, "I spoke to a tenant last week. She told me the rent she's been paying. It doesn't match what you've been sending me." He didn't blink. He said, "There are operating expenses. Repairs. Taxes. Property management fees. I've been covering a lot out of pocket, Lauren. I didn't want to burden you with the details." I said, "Show me the receipts." He said, "I don't carry them around. They're in my office. I can send them to you." I said, "Send them today." He said he would. He never did. Instead, he called me that night. His tone had changed. He said I was being ungrateful. That I had no idea how hard he'd worked to keep those buildings running. I asked her what she paid in rent. She said $1,100 a month for a 2-bedroom. I pulled up comparable units in the area. Market rate was $1,600. Richard had been undercharging tenants, pocketing the majority of even that reduced income, and providing almost no maintenance. He'd turned my inheritance into a slush fund. I drove to his house that afternoon. He lived in Lake Oswego. Nice neighborhood. Two-story colonial. New Audi in the driveway. All of it built on money he stole from me. I knocked. He answered. He looked surprised. Then pleased. He smiled and said, "Lauren, what are you doing here? Why didn't you call?" I said, "I need to talk to you about the properties." His smile thinned. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Like he didn't want me in his house. I said, "I spoke to a tenant last week. She told me the rent she's been paying. It doesn't match what you've been sending me." He didn't blink. He said, "There are operating expenses. Repairs. Taxes. Property management fees. I've been covering a lot out of pocket, Lauren. I didn't want to burden you with the details." I said, "Show me the receipts." He said, "I don't carry them around. They're in my office. I can send them to you." I said, "Send them today." He said he would. He never did. Instead, he called me that night. His tone had changed. He said I was being ungrateful. That I had no idea how hard he'd worked to keep those buildings running. That I'd been living my life in Seattle while he dealt with tenants, repairs, and evictions. He said if I wanted to take over, I was welcome to. But I'd see how much work it really was. And then maybe I'd appreciate what he'd done. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm hiring an attorney." He hung up. 2 days later, Victoria filed a civil suit. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conversion. Fraud. We requested a full forensic accounting of every dollar that passed through those properties for the last 8 years. We also filed a complaint with the state licensing board. Richard held a property management license. If we could prove what he did, he'd lose it. He responded fast. His attorney sent a letter claiming that the management agreement gave him broad discretion over expenses and fee structures. That I'd been fully informed. That I'd never objected. That this was a family dispute being weaponized. Victoria tore it apart. She showed that Richard had never provided me with itemized statements. That the fees he'd taken were quadruple the industry standard. That he'd failed to disclose conflicts of interest. And that he'd undercharged tenants while pocketing the difference, something no legitimate property manager would ever do. The forensic accountant we hired found something even worse. Richard had been double billing. Claiming repairs that never happened. Filing for expenses twice. Pocketing security deposits that should have been held in escrow. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen from tenants too. The case moved slowly. Depositions. Document requests. Delays. Richard's attorney tried everything. They claimed I'd abandoned the properties. That I'd given Richard implied authority. That the statute of limitations had passed. Victoria shot down every argument. She was relentless. And I was patient. I'd waited 8 years without knowing I'd been robbed. I could wait a little longer to watch him answer for it. Then something unexpected happened. We got a call from another tenant. A man named Gene who'd lived in the Oakland building for 12 years. He said he'd heard about the lawsuit. And he had something we needed to see. Gene had kept every rent receipt Richard ever gave him. Every written notice. Every repair request. He'd kept them because Richard had tried to evict him 2 years earlier over a lease violation that never happened. Gene fought it and won. But he'd learned not to trust him. Gene's records showed a clear pattern. Richard had been raising rents without notifying me. Keeping the increases. Underreporting income to me while overreporting expenses. He'd been running a parallel set of books. One for me. One for himself. Victoria called it the smoking gun. We updated the complaint. We added racketeering. Richard's attorney tried to settle. They offered $200,000 and a mutual non-disclosure agreement. I said no. Victoria said we could win more at trial. I didn't care about more. I cared about the truth being on record. We went to trial 4 months later. It lasted 6 days. Richard sat across the courtroom in a suit I'd probably paid for. He didn't look at me once. His attorney painted me as a spoiled, absent heir who didn't appreciate the work her uncle had done. Who'd signed away her responsibilities and now wanted to blame someone else for her ignorance. Victoria painted him as exactly what he was. A fiduciary who'd betrayed the trust of a grieving 21-year-old girl. Who'd stolen from his dead sister's daughter. Who'd built a lifestyle on theft. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found in my favor on every count. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conversion. Fraud. Unjust enrichment. The judge awarded me $672,000 in restitution. Another $190,000 in punitive damages. And my legal fees. Richard appealed. The appeal was denied. His property management license was revoked. He had to sell his house in Lake Oswego to pay me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But I also felt something else. I felt like I'd finally stopped letting people manage my life for me. I took control of the properties. Hired a real management company. Raised rents to market rate. Fixed everything that had been broken. Within a year, those buildings were generating $15,000 a month in net income. Exactly what my grandfather had intended. Richard and I haven't spoken since the verdict. His kids, my cousins, sent me angry messages. Said I'd destroyed their family over money. That I should have forgiven him. That family is supposed to come first. I didn't reply. Because they didn't understand. This wasn't about money. It was about the fact that Richard looked at a grieving 21-year-old girl and saw an opportunity. He saw my trust and turned it into a revenue stream. And he did it for 8 years without flinching. That's not family. That's predatory. I'm 32 now. I still live in Austin. I sold the Tacoma building last year and bought a small commercial property here. I manage my own portfolio. I read every lease. I review every statement. I know every tenant by name. I learned something my grandfather tried to teach me but I wasn't ready to hear. Trust is not the same as neglect. Delegation is not the same as surrender. And family is not a free pass to take what isn't yours. If you've ever been in a situation where your family refused to hear your side, drop a fire emoji in the comments. And if you think Richard is going to regret this, type karma. One more thing. Last year, I got a letter. It was from Richard's attorney. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to write a letter to the court supporting a reduction in the judgment. He said Richard was struggling. That he'd lost everything. That this was ruining his retirement. I wrote back. I said no. I said that Richard had 8 years to come clean. 8 years to send me accurate statements. 8 years to do the right thing. And he chose theft. Every single month. I said that my retirement started when I was 21. And he stole it. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt clear. Richard taught me something valuable. He taught me that people will take as much as you let them. That silence looks like permission. And that sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become the one holding the paperwork. I visit my grandfather's grave every year. I bring flowers. I sit there for a while. And I tell him I finally understand what he was trying to give me. Not just buildings. Not just income. He was trying to give me power. The kind that doesn't come from a degree or a job title. The kind that comes from owning something. Controlling it. Building it. Protecting it. Richard tried to take that from me. But in the end, he just taught me how to fight for it. I own those buildings now. Not in name only. I own them in practice. In knowledge. In control. And no one will ever take that from me again. I have to pause here. What do you think Richard did next? Option A, he tried to reconcile privately. Option B, he threatened legal action again. Option C, he disappeared entirely. Drop your answer in the comments. Richard didn't try to reconcile. He didn't threaten more legal action. He did something quieter. He started telling people I was the villain. I heard it through extended family. Through mutual acquaintances. He told people I'd misunderstood the agreement. That he'd worked for free for years. That I was greedy and ungrateful. That I'd destroyed his reputation over a misunderstanding. He rewrote the whole story. Made himself the victim. Made me the entitled niece who turned on family. Some people believed him. A few cousins stopped speaking to me. An aunt sent me a long email about forgiveness and grace. About how my mother would have been ashamed of me. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just sent her the court documents. All of them. The judgment. The forensic accounting report. The evidence of double billing and falsified expenses. I didn't add commentary. I just attached the files and wrote, "This is what happened. You can believe him or you can read this. Either way, I'm done explaining." She never replied. But she stopped forwarding me Richard's version of events. And I realized something important. People who want to misunderstand you will find a way. People who want to believe a lie will choose the version that costs them the least. I wasn't interested in convincing anyone anymore. The evidence spoke. The court had ruled. I had my money and my properties and my peace. That was enough. The tenant who first called me, Diane, still lives in the Hawthorne building. I gave her a rent reduction after I took over. Not because I had to. Because she'd been the one who cared enough to track me down. She could have just kept quiet. Let the plumbing stay broken. Paid her rent to Richard and moved on. But she didn't. She reached out. And in doing so, she handed me the thread that unraveled everything. I told her that once, over coffee. She laughed and said she didn't do anything special. I said, "You did. You told the truth to a stranger. That's rarer than you think." She still sends me Christmas cards. I keep every one. The property manager I hired, his name is Colin, runs all 3 buildings now. He sends me detailed monthly reports. Every income line item. Every expense. Every repair ticket. Every lease renewal. He over-communicates. I love it. I told him once that I probably seem paranoid. He said, "No. You seem like someone who learned a lesson the hard way. That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition." He was right. I wasn't paranoid. I was just never going to be 21 and trusting again. The buildings are thriving now. Occupancy is at 96%. Maintenance requests get handled within 48 hours. Tenants stay longer. Rent comes in on time. It turns out that when you actually manage a property, when you fix what's broken and communicate clearly and treat people with respect, things run smoothly. Richard had been doing the opposite. Neglecting repairs. Ignoring complaints. Maximizing his take while minimizing his effort. And he'd gotten away with it because I didn't know enough to ask questions. I know now. I know what a profit and loss statement should look like. I know what a rent roll is. I know the difference between a capital expense and an operating expense. I know tenant rights laws in 3 states. I know more about real estate now than I ever wanted to. But I'm grateful for it. Because knowledge is the only thing that can't be stolen from you. Last year, I started mentoring young women who inherit property. There are more of us than you'd think. Daughters who lose fathers. Nieces who lose aunts. Granddaughters who suddenly own things they don't understand. And there are always people ready to help. Some of them are legitimate. Some of them are Richard. I teach them how to tell the difference. I teach them to read a contract. To ask for references. To verify expenses. To never sign anything out of grief or guilt or gratitude. To remember that trust without verification isn't trust. It's negligence. One woman I mentored last year inherited a duplex in Sacramento. Her brother-in-law offered to manage it. She was about to say yes. I told her to get 3 bids from licensed property managers first. To compare fees. To check reviews. She did. Her brother-in-law's friendly offer would have cost her double the market rate. She hired someone else. She thanked me later. I told her to thank herself. She'd been the one willing to ask questions. I just gave her permission. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because the next part of the story is where everything comes crashing down. 3 years after the trial, I got a call from Gene, the tenant in Oakland who'd kept all those records. He said Richard had shown up at the building. Just standing outside. Watching. Gene said he didn't approach anyone. Didn't knock. Just stood there on the sidewalk for about 20 minutes, then left. Gene thought I should know. I called Colin. Asked him to install security cameras at all 3 properties. He asked if I was worried. I said no. But I wanted documentation. Just in case. Richard never came back. But I thought about it for weeks. I thought about what he must have felt, standing outside a building he used to control. A building that had funded his life for 8 years. A building that no longer had anything to do with him. I wondered if he felt regret. Or anger. Or just loss. I didn't feel sorry for him. But I did feel something adjacent to sadness. Not for him. For what he could have been. He could have been the uncle who guided me. Who taught me what my grandfather wanted me to know. Who helped me build something. Instead, he became the man I had to take to court. The man whose name I now use as a warning. I don't hate Richard. I just don't think about him anymore. He's not a person in my life. He's a lesson I learned. And I learned it well. My grandfather used to say, people show you who they are. Your only job is to believe them. I didn't believe Richard the first time. I believe everyone now. I've been asked if I would ever forgive him. If he apologized. If he paid everything back. If he showed real remorse. And my answer is always the same. Forgiveness isn't something he gets to ask for. It's not a transaction. It's not a finish line. It's something I do or don't do for myself. And I don't need to forgive Richard to move on. I already have. I don't carry anger. I don't fantasize about revenge. I don't wait for an apology that will never come. I just live my life. I manage my properties. I build my portfolio. I mentor other women. I show up. Richard is irrelevant to all of that. He's a name on old court documents. A line item in my past. Nothing more. The only power he has is the power I give him. And I give him none. That's not forgiveness. That's just clarity. I know who I am now. I know what I own. I know what I'm capable of protecting. And I know that the people who love you don't steal from you in silence for 8 years. They don't rewrite history when they're caught. They don't play victim when the truth comes out. Richard taught me that family is not a credential. It's not a shield. It's not an excuse. Family is what people do, not what they're called. And what Richard did was theft. I didn't cry when the judge read the verdict. I didn't celebrate when the check cleared. I just deposited the money, updated my spreadsheets, and kept building. Because that's what my grandfather would have wanted. Not revenge. Not drama. Just me. Standing on my own. Keeping what's mine. I think about my mom sometimes. What she would have said if she'd known. If she'd seen her brother do this to her daughter, I think she would have been heartbroken. But I also think she would have told me to fight. She was quiet. But she wasn't weak. She taught me that silence isn't the same as peace. And that sometimes love means drawing a line. I drew my line. I enforced it. And I'm still here. Richard isn't in my life anymore. But my grandfather's legacy is. It's in every rent check that hits my account. Every tenant who renews a lease. Every repair that gets done right. Every decision I make with confidence instead of fear. Richard tried to take that from me. He failed. And now I get to spend the rest of my life proving that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, just not with the person who broke it. I rebuilt it with myself. I trust my own judgment now. My own instincts. My own capacity to learn and adapt and protect what matters. That's the part Richard didn't count on. He thought I'd stay 21 forever. Naive. Passive. Grateful. But I didn't. I grew up. And when I did, I became someone he couldn't manipulate anymore. Someone he couldn't lie to. Someone who read the fine print. I became the owner my grandfather always believed I could be. And that's the real ending. Not the trial. Not the money. The fact that I'm still standing. Still building. Still here. Richard stole a lot from me. But he didn't steal that.